But it's just most business owners, they don't see it, they don't notice it, they're stuck in the day-to-day grind of running their business, and even if the opportunity fell into their lap, they wouldn't have the capacity to take it, because they're just, couldn't bear the thought of leaving their business for a couple of days. So I use that as an idea to kind of let people know those opportunities are there. Systems allow you to create space, and the space then enables you not only to spot the opportunity, but then to run with them as well.
David, you're very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time coming and looking forward to it.
Great. Well, look, firstly, I want to say I absolutely love the book. I have my copy here. Appreciate the listeners can't see that, but I love it and must compliment you because you have actually dealt with a subject that for many entrepreneurs is as palatable as eating dry Weetabix. the whole topic of process. But before you take us through, and we're going to kind of unwrap the book and the 7-step approach, and before you take us through that, I'm going to jump to the back cover because hidden in here is an absolute entrepreneurial piece of gold. When you discreetly mention that you sold the Melbourne cricket ground, can you share that story with us?
Yes, I'm not too sure if any of the listeners are sports fans, but if you are, you probably know of the MCG. It's like a holy ground here in Australia, and everybody worships sport, and the MCG is the church of sport. And I remember reading a book called The 1 Minute Millionaire by a guy called Mark Victor Hansen and David Allen, and they had this little story. It was almost like just a few pages in the book about a guy called Paul Hartunian, and he sold the Brooklyn Bridge in the US. And the story goes that he was sitting watching TV. He saw them interviewing some of the people who were doing the demolition on the Brooklyn Bridge, and he wrote down the phone number of the wreckers and called them up and said, "Oh, can you deliver all of the discarded wood from the Brooklyn Bridge to my house?" And they said, "Yeah, no worries." And they did it for a few $100. And as they're delivering it, he wrote out this press release saying, "New Jersey man sells the Brooklyn Bridge for $19.95. And then once the wood arrived, he chopped up the wood into little pieces, sent out the press release, and then basically took those little pieces of wood, stuck them to bits of paper, like a certificate paper, and then basically posted them out. And when he sent the press release out, he got hounded by the media. For the better part of 12 months, he was on every TV station, newspaper, magazines, radio, with this idea of the man who sold the Brooklyn Bridge. And it was just little pieces of the Brooklyn Bridge that he'd got that were effectively going to go to scrap and just get thrown out. So I'd just read this book. I was driving past the MCG and I saw this huge gaping hole in the side of the MCG where they just ripped down the Ponsford stand. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Fireworks went off in my brain. It was just like everything all clicked together. And I said, hang on, brilliant. I can do exactly what Paul Hartunian did here in Australia. I will copy that same system, that same approach, and then apply it to this situation. So I outreached to the MCG and found out who was doing the demolition, went and got my hand on a bunch of the green wooden seating, which was very iconic for the MCG, and some discarded carpet with the MCC crested logo, which is the Melbourne Cricket Club, which lined quite a few of the members' pavilions. Got all of that collected, brought it home, chopped it up into pieces, and then the rest is history. I just followed in Paul's footsteps. I wrote a press release. Melbourne man sells the MCG for $24.95. And then I chopped it up into little pieces, stuck it to the certificate paper, and sent out the press release, and then basically got hounded by the media. And then that was my first venture into sort of business and the entrepreneurial world. It's a little bit of a whirlwind, and I learned so many great things from it. And a fun little story too.
It's fantastic. I noticed actually you'd given little bits of the seed for anyone who wishes to find out a little bit more on what the Melbourne cricket ground looks like in terms of what David's referring to. You actually leave little bits with a TEDx audience
Yes.
during your talk, which I thought was genius. So it's a wonderful story, and often entrepreneurialism is seen as contrarian to process and operationally focused people. Did this kind of appeal to both inside you? Because clearly you have a lot of both. What age were you, by the way?
I had just finished school, so it was 2021. Like I was just sort of in that bracket there. So I was wide-eyed, bushy-tailed, saw the world as my oyster, anything was possible. And I was really just looking for my opportunity, and it kind of just presented itself.
Brilliant. And have you any of the cricket ground left?
I do. I save it for very special events. We didn't have any last year with all things COVID with the live events, but I do like to hand out little pieces of the wood as like a bit of a memento. I get to tell the story and get someone to kind of take the idea away that systems and processes, what they actually allow you to do, those opportunities for business owners exist all of the time.
Right.
The opportunity of a lifetime rolls around, but it's just most business owners, they don't see it, they don't notice it. They're stuck in the day-to-day grind of running their business. And even if the opportunity fell into their lap, they wouldn't have the capacity to take it, because they're just couldn't bear the thought of leaving their business for a couple of days. So I use that as an idea to kind of let people know those opportunities are there. Systems allow you to create space, and the space then enables you not only to spot the opportunity, but then to run with them as well. So I have to make sure I send you a piece.
Great. I look forward to it. This is really the USP of the book, and we'll get into that a little bit more in terms of what's in it for the entrepreneur to actually embrace and engage with processes. As I say, something that's often contrarian to entrepreneurialism. So just as I said, before we actually start to unpack the 7 steps, there's one other story, and the very famous godfather of systems, Michael E. Gerber, who wrote the wonderful book, The E-Myth and the E-Myth series, actually provides the foreword to the book. And there's a wonderful story in the book in terms of how you actually get to meet Michael Gerber. Can you share that with us?
Yes. That one was another case of the universe just aligning itself for me. I see when you're in business, it's a little bit like a game of snakes and ladders. You're just progressing up the board. You're plodding along. You're rolling the dice. You're moving a few steps forward. Occasionally, you'll land on a ladder. Some people are unable to climb up that ladder because for whatever reason, they just don't have the capacity to. But if you land up on a ladder and then you're able to climb up that ladder, you can potentially skip 30, 40 spaces just like that, and you'll end up winning the game. And I had that opportunity present itself with Michael, and it was just almost like coincidence or happenstance. I mean, it just happened where I owned a digital agency, and I had a side business, which was the early days of Systemology and System Hub. And Luz Delia Gerber, Michael's wife, reached out to me via email. One morning, I had no contact with the Gerbers whatsoever, and I got an email saying, call me. And I didn't know her name, Luz Delia, but I definitely knew the surname, and I knew the domain name because I went to the michaelegerbercompanies.com. And I said, I know this. Like, the E-Myth had such a profound impact on me and the way that I approach business. And the number, it just said call me, and it was her phone number, and I called her, and she said, oh, look, I've just seen you launch your first book, Authority Content. And I thought it was fantastic. Now, Michael's just turned 80. He's written the final book in the E-Myth series called Beyond the E-Myth. We've decided for the first time not to go through HarperCollins because we want to maintain the rights and have control of the work. And so we need to do a book launch. I saw you do your book launch. I liked what you did. I know you're on the other side of the country. Or on the other side of the world, rather. Would you be interested in launching Michael's book? And I said, I'd love to. Like, I was a little bit starstruck, and I hadn't even had the chance to talk to Michael yet. And I said, look, I don't do book launches. That's not my thing. Like, I own this digital agency. We're not a book launch company, but I'd be more than happy just for the opportunity to work for Michael. not only that, I'd be happy to donate my time. So I worked on it as a labor of love with Michael. It was a 3-month exercise. I worked pretty much sort of 60, 70-hour weeks just working on his business on that book launch. I was fortunate that I'd built the digital agency up to a point where I had a CEO. She was running the day-to-day operations. And I said, look, this is one of those opportunities. We're playing snakes and ladders, and I just landed on a ladder. You need to let me follow this. So she gave me the space to do that. And I worked on Michael's launch. It was a huge success. First book for him that became an Amazon bestseller in 24 hours. He invited me over to the Dreaming Room, which is an event that he runs in Carlsbad, California. It was like one of the last live events that he's running because he's kind of moving out of that space. And it's all about finding your dream, your vision, your purpose, and your mission. And I flew over to that. I had a couple of friends that I got to help me out in the book launch, and I invited them over as well. And we rented this really amazing house hanging off a rock face overlooking the Pacific Ocean in La Jolla. And we're just kind of in this absolute Mac Daddy house we got off Airbnb for the week. And we went to the event with Michael, and the event went really, really well. At the end of the event, Luz Deli said, look, we've got this closed-door mastermind after the event that we'd love you to attend. And it's all about the future direction of the E-Myth and Michael's work. And she said, would you love to attend? And I said, yes. Didn't think too much of it. The night before the mastermind, she came to me and she said, oh, look, we were supposed to get Tony Robbins to come in and MC the event. That didn't end up happening, and we're not too sure who can MC the event. So I stuck my hand up and I said, I'll MC it if you like. And she said, okay. So here I am in the room. It was like a presidential suite in this amazing, immaculate hotel in La Jolla. It was in the presidential suite when Michael was staying with the who's who in business. We're sitting around, and I lead this 2-day mastermind on the future direction of Michael's work. And that was, for me, like an opportunity of a lifetime. And it just so happened that a series of events led me to that. 3 months earlier, I'd never even spoken to Michael, and here I was at the front of this room leading this group. And it formed a really tight bond between Michael and I. We've worked on many different projects after that. He's taken an incredible shining to the work that I'm doing with Systemology. Even the forward, I've had many people read the forward and say it feels like he's handing the baton to you, because he talks about, the appreciation of each other's work. And I think what he did and started, I believe Systemology completes, because he opens the door for business systemization, but there's still a lot of how do I do it? Where do I get started? What's the first step? And that's really what Systemology does. It completes that picture.
Yeah, before I understood that story or learned about that story, I thought you were a Michael E. Gerber protege. It was some kind of Michael Gerber school that you went to before you wrote your own book on Systemology. So what an incredible story. There's not too many people can say they've been the stand-in for Tony Robbins. So well done on that in that regard. I mean, you've alluded to something there, and you spoke to the outset, and we'll get into it whenever you start taking us through the steps, is that it's the contention that the opportunities for everyone, and especially entrepreneurs, they're out there all the time. But if actually we're stuck in the bowels of the business, we don't get to actually lift our heads to actually see those opportunities and grasp them, as you've explained, where you actually systemized your first business to the point where you were able to step away for 3 months. So certainly the CEOs that I would deal with, you're in this position where they want to step away and have that level of freedom, but when it comes to it, they're kind of almost like this elastic band. They spring back. They end up really stuck. So take us through then, if you would, David, the approach within Systemology.
Yeah, so it's a really common problem that business owners face. Oftentimes it's the business owner and the startup. founder that gets something off the ground. They see the problem in the world, or they see an area they think is underserviced, or they're working with someone that they think, oh, I can do a better job, and then they go out and then start that business. That person oftentimes is a visionary and is a creative, and they're quick at starting things, getting it off the ground, and just they're a quick mover. And oftentimes that becomes the blessing and the curse. The blessing because it enables them to get the business off the ground, the curse because then they hit the glass ceiling. They can't grow and move beyond that, because to get system and process down, it takes a different mindset. It takes a different person. And one thing that I really recognized is I fell in love with the result that business systems brings. I didn't fall in love with the idea of documentation. Like, I don't like writing systems and processes. I don't get out Word documents and love doing bullet points and Roman numerals and adding flow charts in. Like, that doesn't really get me going.
When did the penny drop for you? When did the penny drop that actually systems could set you free? And that's a phrase that you use within the book, which I love. When did that revelation come?
I have had it reinforced all throughout my career in different businesses that I've been involved in. So it started off in the stock market education space, and we learned all about trading systems, and you would basically design a system that would work in a variety of different market conditions, that when you followed it, would basically remove the emotion so that it could also be done by multiple different people to get a similar outcome. So that programming was very, very early. Then there was another business I was involved in, a rock and roll clothing music store that we opened here in Australia, and we went to franchise that business. We had to systemize it for franchising. Then there were other parts of the digital agency. I had a subdivision of that business, which was a video production business, but I didn't know how to turn a camera on. I didn't know, like, I'm not a video person, so I had to build it from the ground up without me in it. That was a big breakthrough for me, realizing that it was possible to build a business where I wasn't involved in the delivery of the product or service. In fact, that insight and that idea was really transformational, because most of the businesses that I'd been involved in up to that point, I'd really been heavily involved. Whereas that little business, it was almost like in an incubator with inside this other business. It was just another division. And then once I saw that, and I mean, there's been so many different things. It's hard for me to point to any one thing. I even remember working with Michael Gerber, and I realized that he is horrible at systems and process.
That's a revelation in itself.
I know, that's the dirty little secret. But he is the visionary who can see something in his mind and bring it into the world, and he's surrounded himself with his team who can then handle the systems and the process and that piece for him. Because, again, he fell in love with the result of the business systems, not the creation of it. And he realized that to really grow and scale a business, you need it. Like, it's an absolute critical must. To build a business that works without you, there is no other way. At some point, you have to cross that bridge. And he did it by bringing in great people to do it, which is okay when you've got a little bit of momentum and you've got some cash flow, and maybe when you bring in those great people, they can draw on systems and processes that they might have either created in other businesses, or they've seen that and they can bring it into the business. That doesn't always work for everybody. Not everybody is a well-funded startup that can bring in great talent or hire a consultant. And that's where the idea of systemology came into place, which is, how do you approach business systems for small business? How do you capture process when you don't yet have process documented? Things like Lean and Six Sigma, that's all about process improvement. Systemology is very different. Systemology is about capturing what's your best practice of what you're currently doing, and that becomes version 1, and that is the base level.
I'm interested actually in the mindset, because clearly in all of the different businesses that you've been involved with, you've had a mindset where it's come up with the idea, develop the idea, nurture it along, create the systems behind, attract in the people, and move on. In fact, I love the fact that on your website, you announced with a big smile that you kind of sacked yourself from the CEO position. So, what's the mindset that underpins that?
One thing that I think about that was one of those turning points to heavily systemized, I covered in the book, is this idea that when we fell pregnant, I realized I didn't want to be that dad who was always too busy. My dad was like that. He worked from home, but he was never really there because he was always thinking about work. Morning, night, weekends. When I found out we were pregnant, I said, I can already see myself heading down that path because I was a business owner. I had the home office. I was already doing a lot of the things that I was following in my dad's footsteps. And then that's when I thought, oh, okay, well, I need to make a change here. I know the systems approach is the way because I'd seen it a few times. And then I realized I was carrying a lot of baggage, even though I'd seen systems and processes work so well in multiple different businesses. The digital agency for a long time there, I thought was different. I thought, I can't systemize a digital agency. It's so creative. My team's not going to follow the process. And I thought, why would I even document systems and processes when Google's just going to update their algorithm and everything's going to change anyway, and these systems and processes are going to be out of date? And I thought I thought I'd have to systemize hundreds of different systems and processes. And I basically challenged a lot of these different beliefs because I know I've seen businesses that have systemized and scaled and moved beyond the founder. So I know it's possible. And I've seen it in every single industry. And then I realized that there is a difference between being a business owner and being an employee of your own business. Yeah. A business owner operates separate. If you think of your business like a system, or your business is a system and there are subsystems within it, you as the business owner want to operate external of that system because that's when you do your best work, when you can look back on the system and then say, as the engineer, here's how we want to change things. This is broken. This can be fixed. We can, tune this part. The opportunities only present themselves when you're outside of the system.
Yeah. And there's a part in this, and you mentioned early on, about developing the systems for the stock trading business that you were involved within to the point where you would remove the emotion from the decision making there. That might jar with some of the entrepreneurs that saying, I'm emotionally involved in this. This is my baby. This is what I've created. So how do you convince them that actually they can still continue to be creative whilst at the same time systemizing their business? How do you ensure that through this approach, you're not kind of making something homogenous or sterile or kind of removing the color from it and the emotion? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the first thing to recognize is I don't think 99% of the people listening to this should systemize like McDonald's. We're not looking to hire raw labor, 15-year-old kids off the street who haven't worked a day in their life to have their first job to come and learn how to turn and flip hamburgers and fry chips. Yes, you might need to fully systemize every aspect of the business if that's your intention there, where you down to the level of how you take out the trash. That's not my approach for building business. I'm not building a hamburger business. I love hiring really intelligent team members. I love having A players. I love giving them the room to be able to think and innovate and create and do their best work. Now, the question then becomes, what stops them from doing their best work? It's the same thing that stops you as the business owner. It's all the mundane things that have to happen consistently for the business to function and to deliver its core product or service. So you need to invoice people a certain way. You need to make sure that, maybe you have a sales process or an onboarding process. You need to make sure that you have a recruitment process. There are all of these functions that go in and on inside the business that just need to happen for the business to work. nail those down. And what that ends up doing, and I learned it with the video production business, was that's an incredibly creative business. I found if we systemized the process, in video, we talk about it as pre-production, production, and post-production. Pre-production, it's all about the prep work. So whether that's packing out your kit, having the discovery session, making sure that you've got everything that you need so when you're on the shoot, you can think about doing the shoot. Same with production. There's certain things that you'll need to do, the way that you need to set things up. Post-production, the way that you ingest the footage and organize all of your folders. All of that stuff needs to happen, and that's in addition to the creative process. If you can just have that handled. I remember sitting with a videographer when we were driving out to a shoot, and because he'd gone through the checklist and he knew he had all of his backup batteries, and he had the second camera, and he had the gimbal, and he had all of his audio equipment and extra batteries because he ticked it all off. In the car, he was planning out his shot list. He's sitting there going, oh, I wonder, am I going to shoot it like this? Or which lens am I going to use? And he's thinking about that in his head, the creative part, not did I remember the batteries?
Yeah. Well, on that note,
that's
then,
the big part.
Step us through the process of systemizing your business, and I'm appealing to all of the listeners to go out and buy the book. But if you can give us the whistle-stop tour of the 7-step approach to systemizing your business, that would be great, David.
So the 7 steps, it's about capturing what you're currently doing. That's probably like a really important premise of the book. A lot of people miss. They try and create something new, or when they first start the approach of systemizing, they try and optimize and get it right and perfect it. I say, let's capture what's currently working, figure out what your best practice is, and then get everybody to consistently do that. That becomes your base level. Then later on, we can get around to optimizing and all those sorts of things. So the first and most common question I get is, well, where do I start? And that's the first step in systemology. How do we define the 10 to 15 systems that are central to delivering the core product or service? So we need to identify who's the dream client and what is that core product or service. Then we map the journey for the client and also the business in the delivery of just that core product or service. That's from getting their attention, handling the inquiry, going through your sales process, issuing out an invoice, onboarding them, delivering the core product or service, and getting them to come back.
So this is the definition
stage.
stage.
And you do that on an A4 bit of paper, it's not more than probably 10 or 15 systems. And when you do it, we have a thing we call the critical client flow in the book, in this step number 1 as a way to kind of work through it. Yeah, I mean, you don't even need to buy the book. I've got over at systemology.com/academy, we give away that template. And you just work through that template, and that's where you start. Now, if you want to get a bit more fancy on that, go to where the pain is inside the business. If you say, hey, we have trouble onboarding clients and, client expectation management, start there. If you say, I don't have enough leads, start there. But use the critical client flow as a way to at least narrow your focus. That's step number 1.
So step number 1 is define then what you already have. So step 2. Step
2 is assign, and that's all about then thinking, well, where does the knowledge reside? So there's a good chance when we think about systemizing a business, you've already got a little bit of traction, you've already got a team around you, you're already getting results. If you're too micro, you might be too early to start thinking about systemizing to the level that we're talking about. But if you've got a small team, there's a chance that some of the steps that you just outlined in step number 1, other people know how to do. Where we can, we try and take the business owner out of the equation.
What's the sweet spot in terms of number, in terms of the size of the business?
Sweet spot, I would say, is between 5 and 40. If I was to probably even narrow it further, I'd probably say between probably about 7 and 20.
Okay.
Because at the micro end, you don't get much leverage from the work that you do. because even if you've got a good system or process, you don't yet have the team members to run it, and you're usually very key person dependent anyway. It's just the nature, the size of the business. Oftentimes you haven't yet figured out how you do things either. And then at the other end of the spectrum, once you kind of get up to the 40, really above 30, culture starts to get already set in, and it becomes harder and harder to change. Because what we talk about here, systemology is not one and done. We're changing the culture within the business. We want to build a thriving systems culture where people say, this is how we do it here.
Yeah, and I want to come to that because culture is critically important in terms of undergirding this entire approach. And just in terms of the assign, and you talk about kind of the key dependencies, those people who hold the knowledge, and what we want to do is understand what they hold. What I've found in the past is that people start to get nervous because knowledge is ultimately, what they bring, and if they're going to tell somebody else how they do it, then there's that level of anxiety that seeds in relation to their role. What are they going to do if they tell everybody else how this is going to be done? I've got the magic sauce. This is why I'm recruited. So how do you get over that? I suppose reluctance potentially, or are you finding that is there reluctance within that process?
So when we move through the stages, there's define, assign, extract, and organize, which we'll talk about. And then the one that you're referencing now in particular is the fifth stage, which is integrate, which is all about getting the team to really buy in and see what you're trying to do. Firstly, you need to, when it's presented, it needs to be presented, what is the benefit to them? This is not the benefit to the business owner. We're not saying to them, hey, we're looking to systemize so that I can go lie on the beach, never come into work, and deposit large amounts of money into my bank account with little or no work while you continue to do your work for me. That's not going to get any team member very motivated. What might get them motivated is thinking about things like, hey, when you go on holidays and you come back, you take a week off, you try and take a week off, but I keep following you up because there's a few things that only you know how to do, and you can't have a proper holiday. And when you do come back, you spend the next 3 weeks trying to make up for the 1 week that you were off. Yeah. Well, by systemizing, we can have other team members move these things forward. So when you come back, you can have a restful break and then hit the ground running when you get back. That may appeal to some people. For other people, you might say, hey, if you're systemizing what you're doing, you're then able to pass it on to lower cost team members, which then frees you up. That makes you more valuable to the business. Got it. Because if you can then now do that, you're effectively elevating your way up through the organization, and you're more valuable to us, and that will create more opportunity for you. That might work for some other people. You need to, this is more of a management type thing, where if you've got a good manager on the team, they can, and some HR there, understanding what the team member wants, helping them to understand that there's benefit to them. Sometimes you will get people who create a black box around them. I have been in businesses like that, and they do it by design, because also then you don't know how long certain tasks take. It might only take 30 minutes and they're logging 3 hours of time to do a very simple task because you don't know any better. Those sorts of things do happen. Systemizing and shining systemology onto your business becomes very revealing. And I had someone email me, particularly to do with the integrate stage, and I remember them saying, you make it sound like you're going to be laying off a bunch of people, and management's changed. We don't really do that these days. There's all this 360-degree review process and all this sort of thing. And I just said respectfully, when you go through this process, you might find someone who is not the right fit for the direction that you're now taking the business. They got you to where you are, but I'm not saying just fire them, give them an opportunity, help and support them. But if there's someone actively sabotaging the growth of the business and holding that back, sometimes you just better to bite the bullet. Yeah,
it's interesting. We used to talk about actually making yourself redundant in the role that you were in, and ultimately that was not that you could move on, but ultimately free yourself, give yourself capacity to take the ladders, as you've described in terms of the snakes and ladders, to take the ladder and to be able to climb up to that next step, because of actually you're already overloaded and lacking the capacity, you won't be able to take those opportunities and actually step up to, ultimately, this is to serve growth oriented businesses. This is to serve the scale up agenda. So if the business is scaling up and it has that vision, then ultimately it needs everyone within that business to come to it with a mindset that they want to grow. And in order to do that, they've got to look at their current tasks, which actually they can delegate in order for them to elevate. So that's consistent within the actual 7-step approach, would you say?
100%. It really is all about this knowledge transfer. Michael talked about this idea that every business is a school, and you're effectively wanting to say, how can you take someone from not knowing anything about your business, get them in and train them up to the point at which they're productive and able to, get you a quality output where you can get a positive ROI on the money that you're paying for their wage for them to get an output. You want to try and do that in the least number of moves and in the least amount of time. So it's that knowledge transfer, figuring out how something is done, capturing it, getting it documented, getting a team member to be able to then review that without taking the time away from the valued team member who needs to be doing that thing anyway.
Sure.
Like, if they review a good system and a process, what happens is it takes someone who doesn't know if they've got some good talent up to 80 or 90% of the way there. Then they work with the talented team member and go, oh, I did it this, and they ask their few of their clarifying questions, and then that takes them 100%, and then they take it over. So we've just been able to shortcut the amount of time that really valuable team member has to give to get an unskilled team member up to speed. You dramatically decrease that time that they get pulled away, because they can train multiple people up to a certain level and they have to do the last 10 or 20%.
Yeah. And funny, within the book, The E-Myth, what resonated with me was the point that Michael Gerber made about actually the experience that the customer has should be consistent regardless of who's delivering that part of the business to the customer. So it's not a case of only Jim can do this, and if Jim's gone, well, the experience is very, very different. So we refer in our own book about the likely lottery winners, those who actually the business is so dependent on that if one day they win the lotto and they head off, that you've got a gaping hole in your business. So what strikes me in this, it also mitigates the risk of the departure of those likely lottery winners.
Yes, 100%. And I mean, there's real benefit for the rest of the team for that as well, because the business is in a very risky situation if they are so dependent on a team member, whether it's the business owner or anyone else, that if they walk out the door because they just won the lottery, that the business would grind to a halt or have problems. Yeah. That puts everybody's job at risk. Absolutely. So again, another thing for them to understand that this makes the business stronger for everyone, which means you can have a bigger impact, which means you can support more people and then do more good with the business. Yeah, so there's a real benefit to it.
So back on track here, we define, assign, extract, back to step 3.
So extracting is all about then getting the knowledge out of the heads of the team members. And this comes back to that idea that there are knowledgeable team members on your team that are probably pretty busy. They might not even like writing systems and process. So the real takeaway from this section is to understand, how do we make it easy for a team member to capture the way that they do something? And the real secret is to make it a 2-person job. You have one person who's got the knowledge and you've got the second person who's the documenter. If you just get that piece and you find someone who enjoys doing systems and processes, then it makes everything move so much more smoothly. And that goes double for the business owner, because the business owner typically doesn't enjoy doing it. But for whatever reason, they think they are the people that have to do it. That becomes the roadblock, then it doesn't get done. But if we get someone else to do it, it changes the game.
And there's clever ways of doing this nowadays with all of the technology we have available. Somebody just recording what they do on a phone. You reference a story in the book about somebody following someone else with a GoPro in terms of their day-to-day in terms of tracking their day-to-day activities and what they do. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the one that I talk about in the book is for a roof gutter cleaning company, and they had someone who, wore a GoPro, went out into the field, and basically followed a tradesperson around. But I know we're also working with. I've got the mutual friend through Owen, and he's doing the same thing. I mean, in his business, he's going in and recording on an iPhone things happening inside the business. The key is to think the first time you capture the system, it's the worst it'll ever be. And that is version 1. And that is okay. Imagine that video will never see the light of day. Yes. And it's just for that first go. And if you want to re-record it later, you can, that's fine. So I think people just need to get over this idea of what they think a system should look like. They might have this picture in this head of this, beautiful detailed system and process with all of these bullet points, and that's not where it starts. It starts raw and rough around the edges, and just record it happening as best as you can. Yes. And pull out some of the key steps from there.
Got it. So getting into organizing then the data once you're the capturing the existing processes, once you have them captured, let's talk about organizing that.
The biggest thing with organizing is there's two main functions that I believe you need to nail, and it doesn't matter what system, software, whatever that you end up using to do this, but you need something to assign accountability for who does what by when. Because most people live out of email, and they have a discussion with someone, or they send an email off and they say, oh, can you do this? And then 3 weeks go by, and then they go back to Sarah and they say, hey, Sarah, did you do that task? And they're like, what are you talking about? And you search in your email and you see it in the email and you say, on Wednesday, 3 weeks ago at 9 a.m., I sent you this email and you said you got it. Oh, yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. I had it in my inbox, and then it ended up getting right down the bottom and I haven't got around to it. That's the way that a lot of businesses run, and things fall through the cracks. You need some sort of project management that houses who is doing what by when. So that's a critical part of the organize. And then similarly, from a systems perspective, you need somewhere to store all of this knowledge. If we're extracting it out of people's brains, it needs to be stored. And it needs to be delivered in a way that team members can find what they're looking for when they're looking for it. Now, sometimes when they get assigned a task, you might link to the system or the process that explains how that task is done. Sometimes that might not happen. So there still needs to be enough of a structure that someone could go, hey, they didn't assign the system, but I kind of know where to look. I go here, oh, that's a sales function. I'll go into the sales area. Oh, that's to do with a new lead. Okay, great. I'll look in there. Like there needs to be some order for someone to be able to find it. And then it's that organizing of the knowledge. Most people have it in notes and Word documents, in Dropbox and Google Drive, in
Excel
email,
files.
and like it's scattered everywhere. Oh yeah, I've got a system for the way that I do that. I think it's saved in PowerPoint on Jane's computer. And if it's stored like that, it really means it's nowhere. So that's step number 4, organize, is about organizing your knowledge.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people relate to that, where there's multiple Excel files that are duplicated in lots of different functions, and so it's a case of getting all of that on the table, getting a level of exposure to that, so we understand what we have, and to start to organize what's already there. So, moving on to the integration then.
So then we moved to integrate. That's all about getting staff buy-in. And we did kind of touch on some of the ideas there. The biggest one is to get staff buy-in, because, you can have everything documented, you can have all of the right tools, but unless the team buy in, it's not going to work for you anyway. So to get the buy-in and to really integrate this, you have to position it from the team member's perspective. You also need to think about the way that team members are introduced to your way of doing things. So I kind of want to introduce this idea of creating recruitment and onboarding systems that really embed the system's culture in from day one. That's a real key one, because again, this is not one and done. This is how we do things here and how we always do things here.
And presumably that ideally should be championed by the CEO, where there's an acknowledgement that this is the way we do things around here. Systems are part and parcel of us achieving what we want to achieve as laid out in our vision.
Definitely. I had this discussion with Michael because I had a similar thought to you. And I mean, initially when I wrote the book, I thought the aim of the game is to get it off the business owner's plate as quickly as possible and get it to the CEO. Michael said, he goes, yeah, but. And he doesn't usually like saying yeah, but the but here was that the leader, the business owner, the founder still needs to lead it. As in, the leader leads, they need to believe it, they need to buy in. They can't just completely abdicate and pass everything off to the CEO and say, this is your job. Not only that, when they're, I talk about the story where Melissa, my CEO, really sort of went to my team and said, if Dave's not following the process, don't listen to his emails or whatever. No one is above the rules or above the law. When he's in the house, he needs to take his shoes off. He needs to come in, act orderly and follow the system and the process. When he's outside the system and he's working with his executive assistant, he can be as messy and disorganized as he likes whenever he's outside of the house.
Yeah.
But when he's inside of the house, he follows the process.
How you react to that in the first few instances is absolutely critical in terms of the rest of the team watching how you react to that. Do you completely ignore it and continue to do what you want to do? Or do you actually kind of call out Melissa and say, you know what? I was wrong there. I didn't follow the system. Well done. Systems are the way we're doing things around here. And, I want to acknowledge that. Is that presumably the approach that you took?
Yeah. Well, it was a case of going, do I want to build a system or a business that's dependent on me? I very clearly didn't, and I'd made that decision. So I needed someone else to run it. So if I undermine her, then who's really running it? So I'd kind of got her to a point where I needed to say, you're running this, I back you and I back your judgment, because now that then allows me to move away. And yes, you have to find the right person. Yes, that's incredibly challenging. I mean, there's some great books on that topic. Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman talks a lot about that role. He calls it the visionary and the integrator. Michael Gerber talks about it as the leader and the manager. They are two different roles, and you need to let the manager manage. The moment you undermine the CEO, then and not give them their place, it's game over. Yeah, then team members come straight to me. Like there was a period there where team members would go past the CEO because they felt like, they already have a relationship with Dave. They can chat with me and, I'm not going to follow the process, or I'll make an exception or grant something for them. So I start training them to come to me, which is a problem. But if they know I'm just going to follow the process, I'm going to point back to Melissa, that slowly stops happening. And they stop coming to me because we've got a way of doing it and it doesn't involve me.
And we could get into a conversation around culture for another 2 hours, I think. Moving on to scale, then the sixth step before we get on to the final step, which is optimize.
So then the scale step is all about what are the systems required to scale the business outside of what we covered in the critical client flow, which is that first step in define. Your business is a collection of systems. Your business is one big system. If you think about the departments as subsystems, we then need to go, what is the 80-20 of the business here? What are the 20% of the systems that deliver 80% of the result? And what are the 20% of the systems in each one of the departments? So what are the handful of financial systems? What are the handful of management systems? What are the handful of sales and marketing and HR and operations? We just want to make sure that we're well-rounded. A lot of people think, I'll just focus on my strengths, and maybe they're really good at selling, or maybe they're really good at marketing, but other parts of the business is quite weak. And while I agree that you need to focus on your strengths 100%. But that doesn't mean that you can exclude or not think about the other departments. It just means you need to get someone else to take care of those. If you want to focus on your strengths, those other things still need to be done, because the business as a whole and the health of that business relies on the performance of each of those different departments. So we start to think about, well, what are the other systems that create this healthy business? And that's what the scale is about.
Great. So finally, moving into optimizing then what's already there.
Yes. And I leave this till the end, and mainly just because, again, nothing should get in the way of getting up to this point.
Yes.
It's about capturing, it's about making it as easy as possible, identifying best practice and bringing everybody up to that level. Once we get to that level, optimizing for me has to do with listening to the business. You don't want to start creating systems for system's sake, or thinking, oh, I should do this system or that process. Certain things in your business might be happening just fine. And just because you don't have a system in place doesn't mean they're going to magically stop happening. Like, they're still going to keep happening. So maybe, in the limited amount of time that you have as a business owner or a CEO, you need to be able to prioritize. And the best way to prioritize initially in those early days is listening to the business, finding out where the problems are, and then optimizing those areas of weakness or those areas that are having problems. So the final step is about putting a dashboard into place, getting your key metrics, listening to those metrics, and then having a process for the way that you address problems. Initially, there'll be lots of problems. It'll feel like, oftentimes business can feel like whack-a-mole, but when you approach it with this way and you solve something with a system, so you look for the system solution, you'll notice over time the small problems start to just disappear. And then what ends up happening is you start to get higher quality problems. And that's really the problems that the business owner wants to be solving. The business owner is actually great at solving problems. The problem is most business owners keep solving the same low quality problem again and again and again and again because they haven't solved it with a system. Whereas what we want to do is still get you to do problem solving, solve it once, and then move on to the next problem.
What strikes me when we move down through the 7 steps is, first of all, there's genius in simplicity, and it's simple in terms of what you're describing. And I can't understand why it hasn't been done before, because for me, again, I'd like to get your opinion on this, but Lean and Six Sigma, Kaizen all fall in after this, after actually you have a base level of process and systems already in place. But actually, until you've described and set out the 7 steps here in systemology and the systemology approach, I'm not sure there's been anything there to actually take us up to this point. Is that your
100%.
view on it?
That's the problem that I saw. Even when you talk about those methodologies, they're referred to as process improvement.
Yes.
But if you don't have a process, how can you improve it? So it's the classic, we have to first capture what the process is and get a baseline before we can improve anything. So this really is about process capturing. And that's really where it all starts. And then, you add in things like, I'm not even a fan of ISO systems and accreditation, because most of that it's about ticking a box. It's about thinking, the auditor is going to come around next month and I need to make sure that I've got my systems in process, that I've reviewed them, and I've got a nice little audit trail, so I get my tick and I become ISO accredited. But no one follows those systems. They usually buy them off the shelf, stick them into a folder to tick that box. I'm talking about creating systems with a purpose, things that improve the efficiency and the scalability to reduce error and grow that business.
Yeah.
So this is such a poorly addressed part of business because it's in the blind spot for business owners. And there's very few people that have both minds to be able to see the creative and then be able to see the process as well. And when I come across them, I'm like, ooh, that's rare. And I think not only that, for most people, for the person who is the visionary creative, They don't get excited by systems and processes. So they're not only not very good at it, then they tend to avoid it. It's not something that they're interested in. So there's such a poor amount of work done in that space.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love the practicality of it. And it's the proposition here is essentially address your systems early on, which will continue to allow you to actually take those ladders of opportunity whenever they arise. And they're always there. It's a case that so many are stuck in the balls of the business. And when you think actually the numbers are incredible, I've been speaking recently with the chairman of the ScaleX Institute in the UK, and less than 1% of SMEs in the UK are actually achieving scale up. That's 20% year-on-year growth. And it strikes me that when you can actually implement the systemology approach here in terms of actually enabling the business to achieve its growth vision, then the entrepreneur, who's typically the creative, the igniter, the visionary, it allows him to continue to do that without actually getting sucked back into the balls of the business. So, look, I want to commend you for what you've done. I also commend you for writing a second book. It's certainly a labor of love, having spent the last 18 months doing the same. Just before we wrap up, what's the vision now for Systemology, David? Because obviously you're going to have to walk your talk and systemize Systemology and take this to...
It's funny telling that, because in the Systemology book, I talk about the 4 stages of business systemization, and Melbourne SEO, the digital agency, I got to the final stage, which was the saleable stage. Systemology is not there yet. I'm still in it. We're going through the process of effectively extracting the IP out of my brain. I've proved it on many different levels in the own business, working one-on-one with clients, working in groups. We bottled it to effectively get it into the book. So now it's a matter of, okay, well, how do we then start to create the systems to scale this? And we talked just before we started the recording. My vision now for how we'll spread this message is through, we call them systemologists. We certify business coaches, advisors, consultants in the method of systemology, so they can then deploy it for their clients' businesses. It's like a value-added service that they can add in for businesses. So the goal for this year is we want to get it to 130 certified systemologists. We're at 30 at the moment that have gone through the program. So, and we're about a quarter of the way into this year. So another 3 quarters to get another 100 systemologists on board.
Fantastic. I love the name Systemologist. And I'm a fan of the approach. You referenced Owen earlier on. One of our team members is actually training to be a certified systemologist at the moment. So fantastic. And finally, I always like to leave the listeners with 3 timeless takeaways. So if you could only leave them with 3 things, what would those timeless takeaways be?
Knowing that this was happening, I sought out a few sort of inspirational quotes that have kind of had the biggest impact on me. One being, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. That's a Jim Rohn quote. Another one was from the godfather of business systems himself, Michael E. Gerber. He said, if your business depends on you, you don't own a business. You have a job, and it's the worst job in the world because you're working for a lunatic. And then the last one I'll leave is mine. I say complexity is the enemy of business systemization.
I absolutely love those. And there's another 2-hour podcast in the first one there in terms of the inner work. So hopefully we'll get you back on another time. David, you've been an absolute gent, very generous with your time. Loved the last hours just flown by. For people who want to reach out, you've mentioned the Systemology website, any other social media handles that you want to throw out there?
Yeah, look, just if you head to systemology.com/book, that'll link through to the book, or head over to Amazon, grab a copy. Obviously, if you're listening to this right now, you like audio. So there is the audio book version. Michael reads the foreword. His wife makes a cameo in it as well. So check out the Audible or get the physical copy. And there's links to my socials in there as well. So if you want to ask a question, Twitter, LinkedIn, check out my YouTube channel, whatever sort of floats your boat, and I'll do my best to help and point you in the right direction.
David, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you.